Hello, friends, and welcome to the Reclamation Podcast. I'm your host, Megan Colleen Johnson, and I'm here to guide us in raw conversations about thriving in life and work, so that together we can step into personal agency and stop letting life happen to us. We'll cover topics like health, boundaries, communication, finances, and worthiness. That badass business you've been dreaming of, it's not so far off. The desire to wake up feeling fully alive, it's right around the corner. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode. I just have a feeling it's going to be really good and juicy, and I'm so excited about it. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I'm going to set the stage of where I'm recording from, what I have in front of me. And today is kind of fun. I stole a couch cushion from the living room and brought it into my office, brought a couple extra plants into the office, have some incense burning. So I'm on the floor. I have a big fluffy blanket and my dog curled up next to me, surrounded by plants, have some tea, incense and candles and some crystals, just really vibey today, which is fun. So that is where I'm coming from today. And I'm so excited because today I have Lauren Scott in front of me, and we are going to be chatting about so many good things, but I am going to just read through her bio and then let her kind of introduce herself as well. So Lauren Scott is an ecotherapist, sex coach, roller skater, and book nerd devoted to being the embodiment of ecstasy. Lauren has worked in the areas of trauma, sex healing, and feminine wholeness with various mentors to deepen her understanding and connection to the divine within and the power of pleasure to connect us to ourselves and each other. Lauren lives in Denver, Colorado, and spends time walking in nature and exchanging fun ideas with friends and her circles of women and reading 30% of most of the books in her collection. I love that. So, Lauren, it's so great to have you. So good to see you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I love it. So I would love if you could, for listeners, just set the stage of where you're coming from today and just a little bit of that like fun sensory experience, kind of cluing people in on where you're coming from.
Absolutely. So I'm sitting in my office. I have my twinkle lights around me that I put up during the holidays and just decided that they needed to stay. And I'm wearing my new most favorite piece in my collection. It's a sparkly sequined covered, we call it my Technicolor Queen coat. One of my friends coined that. And I have some tea that's really like gingery and cinnamony that I love. And I'm feeling pretty centered today. Like there's a lot of emotions, a lot of energy moving around in the world. And so I just am coming back to like the home and the center of my body.
Totally. Yeah. And for listeners, today we're actually recording this on January 20th. So it's Inauguration Day. We'll be releasing, my goal is to release this on February 1st. That way it's not too far out, just in case that came up. Plus, February is the month of love. And, with your topic of choice, it felt like a really great month to release it. So, but yes, it is Inauguration Day. So lots of emotions. I feel like that's why I have like plants today, lots of centering, grounding things. So yeah, I love that. I also just really love the artwork that I can see in the background of your office. So beautiful. And I wore earrings and stuff today for you because I feel like on Instagram, my experience of you on Instagram is like so playful, and I love that you're wearing your Technicolor coat. I thought about bringing out my crown today too, but I decided to leave that in the closet. But I thought about it. I was like, I feel like this would be the perfect recording to do it for, but I did the earrings. So
love the earrings.
Awesome. So I would love if we could dive into a little bit of your story. What is your reclamation story? How did you start in this work? what did you really have to reclaim to step into the life and the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my story, I grew up in Colorado. I'm the middle child sandwiched between two sisters. And I grew up in a not like super, super conservative Christian home, but pretty conservative. Both of my parents like took us to church. Most of the time it was my mom. And I was homeschooled from 4th to 8th grade. And I was a pretty shy kid. So a lot of my childhood, there was kind of this, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of like me not knowing how to handle my emotions. And growing up in church, there was a lot of like expectations for how women would be and kind of the purity culture movement and the impact that that had on my identity. And I had an experience when I was 7 in which like me and my cousin were kind of doing some sexual exploration and like brought my sister into it. And we were just kind of playing around, and my sister felt uncomfortable and told my mom. And the shame just kind of descended on me like this like heavy, thick blanket. So I consider that experience to be like a pretty traumatic experience for my, my nervous system and how I came to understand myself. And I kind of like donned this like shame, this coat of shame that I wore for 20 years of my life. And especially like going to church and hearing about sexuality and hearing about how women need to cover their bodies and not lead men astray, and how having any sort of like sexual feelings was bad and you needed to wait till marriage. And when I got to puberty, I found myself to be feeling a lot of sexual feelings, like feeling very turned on, feeling very in touch with my sexuality. And so it was the shame of like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm the only one who feels this way. I must be more like boys than I am like girls, because girls don't feel this way. And then going to high school, like not really understanding anything about sexuality or like sexual health. My parents weren't super comfortable talking about it. And so I kind of just learned from, like you do, from TVs and movies and friends, which is like, totally accurate for how sex is and all of that. And yeah, just like kind of growing up into my sexuality from this place of shame and from this place of being really contracted. So and then like having the social component of that too, like, I was homeschooled during middle school, and then getting to high school, I was like, I don't know how to be a human. I don't know how to be social. Like, I don't know what to do with all of these hormones. So it was like a really difficult combination. And then, went to college and started to experiment and play around and sleep around, and not really knowing what I wanted or who I was, or even that I had any value within myself to be able to say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And it kind of was just me throwing myself around at different people to like find my worth. And I also at that same time was really trying to reconnect with my femininity, and growing up and feeling like I was kind of this awkward, like tomboy that like guys didn't really like. I was really athletic and into sports. And I finally got to the point where I was reading every book, like, how do you date? What are all these dating things? Like, how do you flirt? How do you get in touch with your femininity? Because what I saw was like the girls around me were like super flirty and really fun with all of these guys. And there was this like banter, and I couldn't get myself there because I had a ton of anxiety. I was really like shut down in my femininity because of all the shame around my sexuality and around pleasure. And my only source of information was like head knowledge. So I'd read things and it would go into my head, but I had no idea about embodiment or about like being in your body. So my reclamation journey had kind of all of these components of like, how do I feel alive in my body? So it was a lot of like coming back into my body, coming back into feeling my emotions and my feelings, and really experiencing pleasure in my body. And then like really being able to love myself for who I am and how I look. One thing I forgot to mention is that me as a Black woman growing up in predominantly white communities and white churches really impacted how I saw myself, because there was always this expectation and understanding that I wasn't good enough because I looked different, because my skin color was different, because my hair was different. And being able to peel back all of these layers and to like find my true self beneath the shame, beneath the pain, beneath like being different, and being like, oh, actually who I am is like who I meant to be, and that's good. And I don't have to be anyone else to be loved or to be worthy. I can just exist within my body, within my spirit, and then have a whole ton of fun. So it's been like, I would say over the past 5 or 6 years of peeling back all of these different layers. And then I'd say a year, maybe 2 years ago, I really started to come into the understanding of sexuality and what it means to feel like sovereign in my sexuality, and what it means to be able to ask for what I want and to know what I want. And that like as a woman or like a womb holder, that I can ask for pleasure. Like I can really go after pleasure, and with wonderful tools like human design, actually learning for me as a generator that pleasure and ecstasy and like that is my job in the world, is to just create tons and tons of delight by doing the things that I love. And learning those lessons has been so healing and so powerful in actually reclaiming pleasure and saying, no, this is mine, and I can find it for myself, and I can hold it, and I can go after it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing all that. It's like there's so many different pieces to your story as well. So I know that like that's probably just like one snippet really of the, like you said, there's so many layers to that. Oh, yeah. Even just the word pleasure, I think, is just so interesting, because I think, at least within the church, there is so much attached to that word. You just reclaiming the word pleasure as part of your vocabulary, I think, is just so interesting. It's such a journey, not to mention like all of the additional layers attached to that. Yeah, so good. So good. So specifically, I wanted to ask as well, because you'd mentioned the church, like what is your relationship to the church now? I know in many of the conversations I have, there's like this pendulum swing from being in the church, and then there's this reclamation journey and deconstruction, and the reconstruction looks different for everyone. And so like the word pleasure to me is really interesting, but also like, what did that look like for you as you were kind of peeling back those layers as a Christ follower, as a Christian? And then what does that look like for you now? Because from what I see on Instagram, it seems like you still hold, and you mentioned in your bio, like connection to the divine within. And I'm just curious, because I think it's such an interesting journey to see how you still relate to Christianity and how you relate to the divine, while also holding your sexuality, while also holding your pleasure and making room for all of those things. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it changes on the day. And so I felt like last year was this huge shift in a lot of my experiences of spirituality, and especially experiences of Christianity. And like I had started my deconstruction journey like 3 or 4 years ago. But because of everything that happened last year with the very clear political divide in the church and Christian nationalism and all of these things kind of like really prominent, it was really hard for many months of last year for me to even like form the word Christian or to like hold it in my mouth, because I was so turned off by other people who also call themselves Christians. But what I do know to be true, and what I have learned how to do, is to bring my experience of truth back to my body and to really be able to trust the resonance and the feelings that I get in my body that are coming from this place as truth. And so there's elements of Christianity that are still so beautiful, and the ways that Jesus engaged with women and the ways that Jesus lived this embodied divinity is something that I can't turn away from. And I also, like, you know, my mom is very rooted in Christian church, and my grandma and her mom. And so there's also this lineage in my family of these really amazing women who were spiritual leaders in their own rights. Like my great grandmother, she couldn't preach in the church, so she was on the street telling people the gospel, handing out her little tracts. And my grandmother, she would take out her Bible and she would, you know, tear apart the pastor's sermon and tell him all the things that she didn't agree with. And so there's all of these elements of this rebellious energy that I want to hold on to, that I think is very core to who I am. And also being able to like hold on to the truth within the tradition and being like, there's all of this other stuff that's going on. There's all of this deception. There's all of like the patriarchy and control and white supremacy and all of these things. But there's still like this truth that I want to hold on to from the tradition. I think what I've been exploring and what I've been pushing into is the idea of the eroticism of God, like this erotic energy that creates, you know, it causes flowers to burst open and babies to be born, and the transition of the seasons. It's like this energy of life that we see around us that's constantly expanding, that's constantly leading us to grow and to transform and evolve. I think that because of pornography and because of ways that the word erotic has been associated with kind of like seedy, dark, like sexual deviation or something, for me, like reclaiming pleasure has been a doorway to reclaiming other words like the erotic, and reading things like Audre Lorde. She has an essay about the erotic, and it's so fun to be able to say, like, these words have meant, you know, pleasure has been bad and it's been banned and it's been demonized in the church, but it's actually something that is necessary for life on earth. We, like, as women with clitorises, like there's 8,000 nerve endings, and the only reason to have a clitoris is for pleasure. Like there's no reproductive reason that they found. And so there's all of these little hints of why it's good and why it's holy, and like these little handholds where we can actually redeem and reclaim these words for ourselves.
Yeah. Oof, I love that. There was so much there. So good. It really is beautiful to me the more that I think about this word reclamation, how there's actually there's just so much power in that process. There's so many words in our society, in our culture, in our histories, in our lineage, when we can actually give ourselves permission to reclaim something, we can then be able to pull, like you were saying, there's elements of the traditions that you want to continue on with. And then there's other elements that it's like, okay, this actually is not for me. And that's like the whole beauty of giving ourselves permission, I feel like, to reclaim something, to have a reclamation journey, is we actually then critically look at something instead of just taking what we're handed. Yeah, so good.
Oh, hey, it's Megan here. We'll get right back into today's conversation, but before we do, I'm here to let you know about my Coach Yourself to Reclamation Toolkit. This toolkit includes a 30-minute audio training and an ebook journal guide that walks you through the 5 phases of reclamation and how to apply them. If you are a creative, a misfit, or a holy outsider who is done feeling fearful and boxed in, this toolkit is a resource to help you reclaim your dreams and choose your own path. If this sounds like you, head to megscolleen.com, that's megscolleen.com, and purchase your toolkit now. Let's dive back into today's conversation.
Some of what I was hearing you talk about is just this trusting of your body as you were going through your reclamation process, whatever part of that you were in. It's just kind of coming back to that and developing that self-trust, coming back to the sensations of your body. And I was wondering if you could speak a little more to that as well. Like, what was that process like for you? Because I think that can be really scary, especially coming from any type of religious background. There's a lot of detachment from the body, especially people coming from purity culture in evangelical Christianity. There's such a detachment. So then to start trusting your body is so scary. I think it takes a lot of time and practice. But I was curious if you could speak to that and like if you could go into more details of like what that journey looked like for you. How did you experience that? What kind of support did you need as well? Because so many people, I think we try to figure some of that out on our own, and it can be really difficult. We, of course, have the power and the ability to do that. But I think it's also beautiful to like talk about mentorship and to talk about getting support for those things, because like you were even talking about as a kid growing up, and this was my experience as well, I didn't have anybody teaching me these things aside from purity culture, like propaganda. I feel like that feels an accurate word in some ways. But like it's like purity, like I was fed purity culture very prominently, but not actually taught anything about sexuality and about how to have a healthy sexual life and all that stuff. So having that permission to actually have mentors, to have people guide you.
Yeah, that I feel like the embodiment and like the self-trust aspect is this continual process for me. And it's been honestly probably the hardest aspect to reclaim, because that shame of like, I'm bad, and my body is bad, my heart is deceitful, my desires are bad was so deeply ingrained from, experiences in church and from purity culture, that like really coming into self-trust has been this slow, gradual process of being able to like hear myself and to listen to the language of my body through like the sensations and through the emotions, like being able to track, oh, shame feels like this pit in my stomach when it feels really contracted, and my body feels hot, but not hot in a good way, hot like in a sweaty sort of, I'm naked in front of everybody way. So like being able to really name what I'm experiencing, that was really hard. And I actually, for a lot of times in my life, I was really numb. I was really kind of in, thinking about the nervous system and the parasympathetic branch. I was like stuck in that frozen place in the dorsal vagal experience of being just like totally shut down, but feeling super anxious on the inside. So it's kind of a lot of like, working with healers and being seen and being mirrored and being held and having someone else reflect back to me that I was okay. I think one of my therapists that I had a few years ago, it was funny because I was I was describing to her how I was feeling, like I'm feeling sad. I don't have any energy. I just feel really flat. And she's like, I think you're depressed. And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm a therapist. I know what it means to be depressed, but I like had no concept of like the connection to my own body and how I was actually experiencing my life. My orientation was very much like, I'm going to support and help other people, but not take care of myself. And I feel like being able to trust myself really came from this place of, I also like, I need to take care of myself. I need to prioritize my self-care, and I need to build a relationship with my body so that it knows that I'm going to take care of it and I'm going to nurture it and I'm going to be there for it. And I'm going to be there for these younger parts of myself that'll come up through emotions or when I'm emotionally activated by something out in the world, and being able to like come back and mother that part of me and to like be my own parent. So self-trust is huge, and there's a lot of different like nuances to it because women are very much taught to not trust themselves. Like it's definitely like a huge overriding belief is like, don't trust yourself because whatever's coming up is bad. Your emotions are bad. All of that. Stay in your head.
Well, it's interesting because it's so when we do actually trust ourselves so often, especially if it's publicly. I'm just thinking, even if I like speak my mind about something, not always, but depending on the people that I surround myself with, it's very everybody, like my business is everybody's business, like that kind of idea, at least in the church. It's like if I say something, everyone's responsibility is to get me back in line. Like if I do something that's out of step, or that is quote unquote inappropriate, or that is, whatever it may be, everyone, it's their job then to manage me. Does that experience kind of sound familiar?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that obviously hinders self-trust, which I feel like that's where it's that self-mothering, like you were talking about, and giving ourselves permission to name the emotions, because there is so much of that numbing where you just learn to be quiet, to fit this, like what you're supposed to fit, and to help. And I think that's something beautiful as well, at least with my experience with myself and with my clients who have had backgrounds similar to what we've been talking about, is I think there's such a beautiful heart of helping and such a beautiful heart of service. And that's actually amplified when there's also that self-trust. And I think so often we think, based on our previous programming, we think, oh, if I actually take care of myself, if I take time for myself, that's going to harm my ministry. That's going to harm my ability to help others. But it's actually the opposite, which I think is so beautiful and leads back to that. Oh, when I actually give myself pleasure, I have more to pour out to others. I love that. So for people who resonate with what you're sharing, for people who resonate with your story, kind of moving into a more practical space, where do you recommend starting for people? What do you recommend that they, begin to lean into as they're learning to trust themselves, as they're learning to claim pleasure, as they're learning to break down these massive obstacles, massive belief systems that we've grown up with culturally and within the church?
Yeah. I think one of the important things which I've learned is about safety and cultivating the experience of safety. Because a lot of times we stay in our heads, or we stay underneath, like someone else telling us what to do, because we don't feel safe enough to trust ourselves, or we don't feel safe enough to be in connection with our body. And so like doing, grounding practices, being able to feel your body, like to feel supported sitting in your chair, or to be out in nature, and just to allow yourself to like quiet down just a little bit more, maybe starting with some like gentle short meditations, or even just like starting to feel your body and to naming your sensations. And sometimes it is really overwhelming if you've had trauma, or, with a lot of religious spaces, it can be traumatic just to try and like come out of that or to find your own path. So I definitely suggest working with a therapist or a healer or a coach or somebody who can hold space for you, and somebody who can help you to gently like come back in touch with your body. There's so many amazing books out there. There's so many amazing resources and Instagram posts and people to follow on Instagram. And so it's really exciting that there's a lot of resources out there. Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers has a book called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, which has been really powerful. And I recommend that every woman read Come As You Are, like from like a sex ed perspective. It's really powerful and amazing. Yeah, there's like so many really good resources, but like that, there's like the component of having good education and being able to, have community or a healer, someone to be able to like work through your story is really powerful.
Yeah. I feel like for me, it's been really beautiful as well with having a coach. Then my coach actually connects me to additional community, because when I personally, from my experience, when I was in the church, I didn't have a lot of other beliefs around me. I didn't have a lot of other people who were on their own journeys, like reclaiming this kind of thing. And so when I got plugged into a coach, it was like, oh, there's other people. And like I said, I think it's becoming a little bit more kind of out in the open, I feel like, than it was a few years ago, which is so great. But yeah, getting connected to those healers in those different spaces, I feel like it just opens up more of those doors to find people that can hold space and that have been through similar experiences and things like that. So it becomes less taboo, because when it's taboo, I feel like it's just that safety is very difficult to cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your playfulness, because I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this because this topic can, especially when you're talking about like deconstructing faith or finding like reclaiming your faith and pleasure together and what those look like together, that can feel heavy and scary. But that's part of what I really love about your presence and following you on Instagram, is that you invite so much play and so much just joyfulness to the experience, which I think is so important. I personally am a relatively serious and like kind of low-key person for the most part. And so seeing people like you is really important for me and my journey, because I'm like, oh yeah, I can dance. Oh yeah, I should do some fun things. Oh yeah, I should go outside and try roller skating. Like, so I would love if you could speak to some of that, and just, especially because you mentioned you were a relatively shy, like, child. What did that process look like? I feel like there may be more reclamation there, but I'd love for you to share, and I don't want to project onto you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny, I've been thinking about this a lot, because I don't know if you went to a church experience where they like gave prophetic words. And one of the things that came up for me when people would come in is they would look at me and be like, joy, like joyfulness, like all of this. And I never saw it because I was super disconnected from that aspect of me because of the shame. And growing up, my mom like has a pretty traumatic background. And so she had a lot of depression and a lot of chronic pain. So my experience of her as a woman was like very like down and very just kind of muted. And I thought that's what it was to be a woman. And so in the recent years, like really coming back and reclaiming my innocence. And that's like the first stage of our sexual experience, is like being able to reclaim innocence and being able to see that my little girl like loves she loves being in the spotlight. Like she loves like, like sparkly things, and she loves dancing, and actually being able to see myself as joyful has been a much recent experience of like peeling back some more layers and being able to take off my shame shit coat, as I affectionately call it, and putting on my Technicolor queen coat, and being able to see that this part of me, this joyful part of me, is actually part of my gift to the world. And that when I really can lean into it, that's what gives me the fuel and the energy to be able to enter into really heavy stuff like trauma with clients, or religious trauma, or sexual trauma, like being able to hold on to this part of me that can be light and can be, just the lightness helps me to alchemize the heaviness in my life and the heaviness in the world. And like the interaction between, like, this is what our pleasure can do. It can nurture us. It can help us to reconnect to ourselves so that we can then go out and deal with the heaviness of the world and to deal with the heaviness of our lives. And one of the beautiful things that I've learned in doing trauma work is that you have to like resource yourself, and we resource ourselves through pleasure. So it's like if you are having this big emotional experience or things feel really hard, like it's our natural response to actually do something that's like self-care and nurturing and pleasurable, because that's what heals our nervous systems. So it's like this, it's so important. And I think that was not something that I was taught. I was not taught to actually actively seek out pleasure, because it's like, don't do that. That's bad. Like you need to be in control, and you need to be disciplined, and you need to be focused, which is good. We need that sometimes, but we also need pleasure. And especially as like female bodied people, like we need pleasure.
Yeah. And I feel like what came up for me with that too is it's so interesting when I notice sometimes just like looking at our world at large, how most of these recent generations don't have hobbies, and how pleasure is also hobbies. Like just being able to be like, oh yeah, outside of work, I love to do this, this, and this, not because it makes me money, not because of anything else. It just makes me happy. Just because, like, I know just recently a friend of mine posted that she's doing coloring just because. And I was like, oh, I remember a few years ago, I was going to pick up weaving. I should try that again because it was fun. I got to make something and not sell it, not try to make money, just because I like creating. And I love remembering that pleasure is not just a sexually attached word, but actually like we can cultivate pleasure in so many different ways, including our sexual sides of ourselves. So it can be just holding a cup of tea because that makes us happy as we look outside. It can be having our dog sleeping next to us. Like there's just so many layers of it. And we need it so much in our world to kind of come back to that and to like reground us so we can then move into those more difficult spaces and important spaces. Yeah.
So good. And I consider pleasure to be the sensory experience of delight. So it's like whatever like delights you, whatever like lights you up, like that is the pleasure that we need to cultivate in our lives.
Yeah. I love it. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about roller skating. I'm just personally curious because I think it's fun. Have you been doing roller skating for a while? Like, tell me a little bit about this.
So when everyone was locked down in quarantine, I started to see more of the roller skating videos resurfacing. Like, of course, people have been roller skating for years, and I just like had no idea. But all of a sudden, it like became this thing. And my friend actually was like sending me videos, and we were talking, and she is a former figure skater. So, she's been like rollerblading, and she's like, I want to get into roller skating. And so we did last fall, and it's been one of the like very amazing joys in my life is being able to get on those roller skates and to feel like the wind on my face and to feel free. And, of course, there's a lot of falling involved, but it feels with the right padding and, the right supports, it feels really fun to fall and get back up again and to learn new tricks. So it's been so amazing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it. I really want to try and find some place locally where I could try to do that. Right now it's winter. And so I know growing up for me, I grew up in the middle of the woods and would go to camp, and there was a lake there, and I would love to ice skate. And I feel like ice skating to me, when I see people like roller skating, I'm like, oh, ice skating, like the cold breeze on my face and like, the falling and you get back up. And I feel like winter's a little easier because you're usually already pretty padded with your coat and such.
True.
But I think there's sometimes those things that just really bring you to life. And the roller skating movement, I think, is just so fun. So fun.
Yeah, people are so talented. I'm like, someday I will be able to do all the tricks or some of the tricks. I'm really excited to like learn and to be like in my mid 30s, like learning something new, like roller skating is really fun too.
Totally. Oh, I love that. I think just like learning new things at any age is really kind of inspiring. We remember, oh yeah, I can still learn new things. We're almost programmed that as you get older, you can't learn new things. But that's not true. It's fun. It's good. It's explorative. And yeah, love it. So good. Before I move into like wrap up questions or anything of that sort, is there anything that you just feel called to, or like just an inner stirring to share, or that you think might be important for people as they're reclaiming pleasure, or if they've grown up in the church or otherwise?
Yeah, just to express a lot of empathy and compassion for this journey, especially if like hearing the word pleasure stirs up a lot of shame or a lot of, feelings. Yeah, just to extend that it's a journey. And if you're here listening to this podcast, like you're on the right path, and just to take it step by step.
Yeah. And I actually have kind of one more question that kind of popped in my brain as well. I was curious if you have any thoughts or words for people just around cultivating intimacy as well. And I feel like when we're reclaiming pleasure, for a lot of women, it's also kind of trying to recultivate a sense of intimacy. And it may start from a place of intimacy and then realizing, oh, first I need to do this one thing for myself before I can actually cultivate intimacy with others, whether it's a, partnership or even just friendships. So I was curious if you just have any thoughts or stirrings there.
Yeah, intimacy it's such an interesting word.
I feel like it can be kind of charged.
Yeah, totally. And the first thing that comes to mind, which I try and tell all of my clients, is the two relationships. Like we always have this relationship with ourselves in relationship with our friends, our family, our partners, whomever they may be, and to really cultivate intimacy in both, so that, I was just talking with a client about touch. Like you don't need to wait for your partner to touch you if you want that physical touch, like being able to have that intimacy of touch, being able to know on your body what textures, what pressure, what speed feels pleasurable, being able to know your sensations intimately and your emotions and your needs is really important to then be able to communicate it in other relationships. And also for like people who aren't partnered, like you can have this beautiful like sexual relationship with yourself. Like you can have this beautiful experience of pleasure just within yourself. And it's not less than being in a partnered relationship. It's just different. And like for us to be whole beings, we need both. So I just encourage the cultivation of intimacy, both like within yourself, but also within your partnerships, because it's so much easier to translate and to communicate your needs and to be able to attend the needs of someone else when you can say what you like and what you don't like and what you want and what you need and all of that.
Yeah. I'm so glad I asked that question, because I feel like kind of what comes up for that as well. And that was such a beautiful response. Thank you so much. I'm curious. So I feel like with so many people having grown up in the church, there's so much shame around self-pleasure. And if people are experiencing that, or even from your own journey, I don't know what that looked like for you, but I feel like there's this kind of stigma that masturbation is wrong, that it's bad, that, self-pleasure is a sin. And I'm curious, for people who kind of come from that place, do you have any words or thoughts that you can offer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't consider masturbation to be bad, but I definitely have experienced that shame around it. And I kind of just did it in secret, from a very young age. That has always been a part of my life. And so it would spin me into these shame cycles of like, ooh, I have this urge, I have these feelings, I'm feeling really aroused, and then doing it and then feeling so much shame afterwards, like I'm the worst and, I'm so out of control. But it actually is a really natural part of life. Like babies in the womb, they masturbate, like they experience pleasure, like they just touch themselves. And so it's like a very natural part of our life as humans. It's been shamed and it's been stigmatized, like in church, but also in society and culture. And there's been some really awesome people like Betty Dotson, who did a lot of research and wrote a lot of books about it, about masturbation, about sex for one. So it can be a really hard part of life to reclaim. But I think just taking it slowly and being able to look, even starting off, like looking at yourself, like taking a mirror and looking at your vulva and being able to like touch yourself, like starting with breast massage or starting just by paying attention to how it feels to like put lotion on your skin or to like rub your hands through your hair could be like just small steps towards being able to feel your body and to feel like it's okay to experience pleasure in your body. And, if there are safe people around you to talk about it, to find community, just to be like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm going through.
Yeah. And I feel like something that came up for me as well is also like, this is what I'm not experiencing, like being able to name that as well, because there can be that like freeze experience where, maybe there is no sensation, or maybe there is, and having that community to like make all of the different aspects and to realize, oh, I'm not alone. But all of that was so good. And I really appreciate you sharing that. That's great. Yes, so good. So many good conversations. I love bringing these things out into the open and like kind of airing them out. It's so good. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So wrap up questions. Let's dive into these. So what is one way you slow down amidst our busy world?
Yeah, I tend to be a little bit of a workaholic. Like when I'm on a project or I'm really engaged in something, I just want to go all in and throw all of my energy at it. And so one of the things that I've been doing is like giving myself a cutoff time and just stopping, playing with my dog, and enjoying like cooking or enjoying a TV show or just enjoying that experience of slowing down and turning things off.
Yeah. I love that. Over the holiday, I hopped off social media and it was gorgeous. It was so good. It was just that unplugging for a couple of weeks. I love it. And then who are a couple of your current role models?
Yeah, Morgan Day Cecil is one of my mentors. She's definitely a leader for me in feminine wholeness and being able to being able to embody all of the different faces of the feminine. Yeah, there's been a lot of people, I think, that have popped up on my screen. They do all of these different, unique, cool things. I'm thinking of LaVon P. Briggs. Like, she's a pastor, a womanist theologian. She's a pleasure activist. She's like teaches people about spirituality and sexuality. And so I love all of these different people who are just expressing themselves in all of these different ways and combining all of these different fields. And then I also have been just really trying to support like trans creators and non-binary creators and people who are kind of, I think they're really showing us these different ways of being human and how to really exist in your truth when it's like not safe. And I've been learning a lot from all of these different creators who are expressing themselves authentically and openly and so beautifully.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up too. Just like, I think it's so beautiful to see people kind of across all like spectrums of gender helping to reclaim that narrative of like what it means to be human and how it is, unfortunately, still in our world, it feels really unsafe, and it often is unsafe. And yet there's just we put ourselves in all of these boxes, and pleasure looks so different, and being human looks so different, and slowly kind of moving things forward so we can give ourselves permission to do that. Yeah, that's so good. I love that. Love. And then lastly, how can we find and support you online? Because everybody's going to want to connect with you now.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Lauren H. Scott. I'd say that's like my main hub. I also have a free community space. That's just community.havenwholenessstudio.com.
Well, thank you so much. This was so gorgeous and so wonderful. And just to kind of experience your presence in person was really beautiful. Well, I mean, in person via Zoom. I just, again, feel like on Instagram, we can have like one experience of a person. And then when we get to actually be in front of them on Zoom, I don't know, I just have like your presence for everyone who's listening. You just have a very soft and beautiful presence that I haven't experienced on Instagram. And it just feels really safe. So thank you for letting me kind of sit in your aura, your energy, because it's a really beautiful space. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. And, one day maybe we could do some roller skating together in person.
Oh my gosh.
That would be so fun.
Yes, I'll come to you. I've never been to Colorado, so it looks amazing. It seems amazing. I know my husband has a lot of friends out there, so one day the roller skating will happen. I will likely make a fool of myself, but...
Absolutely. Bring your sequins, bring your crown. We'll go roller skating.
Yes. You know it. Awesome. All right. Well, you have such a beautiful, beautiful day. And thank you so much for joining me on this podcast episode.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Reclamation Podcast. I hope it served you on your own reclamation journey, and know that I am rooting for you all the way. If you are desiring support on your journey, head to megscolleen.com. That's megscolleen.com to learn more about me and my current coaching offerings and availability. If you want to learn more about the show guests, head to the show website, thereclamationpodcast.com. And last, but definitely not least, if you found value in the show, sharing this episode with friends and posting a quick review is always appreciated. As always, reclamation is yours.